Well, hello everybody. Here's what I got going with you today. Hopefully you just aced your trig test. I know it's partly challenging in a few areas, but hopefully you did pretty darn well on it. We'll get those graded and in the computer pretty darn quick here. What I'd like to do today is cover with you section 5.9 in a video that might take 22 minutes, I would reckon. It shouldn't take that long. I'm going to click right through it. Hopefully you can keep up easily enough. We decided section 5.9 fit better with chapter 13, our next trig chapter, than it did in chapter 5. So instead of hashing through it and just cramming it in 5, we decided to make a little video for it. Some things that you'll need today. You'll need your calculator. I'll show you how to use that to obtain some of these answers. You'll need that class note sheet that we made up. And this is going to come back and haunt you just a little bit. We're going to use that orange note card a little bit today. I know, you're not smiling now, but that's okay. But let me show you what this main section 5.9 is about. What I've done here, guys, is I'm showing you a right triangle with angle A. And then I put something right here that you already know. I just defined for you sine, cosine, and tangent. You remember sine is the opposite over the hypotenuse. Cosine is the adjacent over the hypotenuse. And the tangent is, of course, the opposite over the adjacent. Those are our three main trig functions, our three main ones. But there exist three others. These are the reciprocals of the sine, the cosine, and tangent. So let me define for you first off here. I need to define for you the cosecant. The cosecant is the reciprocal, that's what that negative one stands for, the reciprocal of the sine. So that means the cosecant is the hypotenuse side divided by the opposite side. The secant is the reciprocal of the cosine. So that's going to be the hypotenuse side over the adjacent side. The cotangent is the reciprocal of the tangent, so that's going to give us the adjacent side over the opposite side. Here's how I remember them. To me, they don't fit right. To me, the sine and the secant should go together, and the cosine and the cosecant should go together. Put the s's together, put the c's together, and let me be. But of course, they're not defined that way. So I now know when I match them up, if I'm dealing with the sine, I got to go with the C one, cosecant. If I'm dealing with the cosine, I got to go with the secant one, the S one. So there's what I've got on the first one. Number 2 is just a quick, easy hit one. Once again, I've given you a right triangle, 5, 12, 13. I'd like to find the sine, the cosine, and the tangent of angle B or beta. Well, the sine value is going to be the opposite over the hypotenuse, which is going to be 5/13. The cosecant then is going to be the hypotenuse over the opposite, so it's going to be 13/5. Just the reciprocal, guys. Cosine of beta is going to be the adjacent over the hypotenuse, meaning the secant is going to be 13/12. The tangent, the opposite over the adjacent, meaning the cotangent is going to be the adjacent over the opposite. Simply the reciprocals. If you multiply them together, guys, you'll get 1 every time. Unless there's a 0 involved. Then that's a different story. That's coming up. So here goes my next one. Let me get rid of this real fast. I'm also going to bring up my calculator. So let me minimize this real fast so I can get that fit for you. That way when I type something in my calculator, you can kind of see what I got going. So here's what I'd like to do. I'll show you a couple of ways to hit these. I'd like to figure out the secant value of pi halves. 2 ways to hit this. I could think of this as the cosine of 90, whatever that answer is, the reciprocal of that. Well, If I come in here and get the cosine of 90, notice my calculator tells me it's 0. Also, if you think about it, 90 degrees is right there. The x value at 90 degrees is 0. So I've got the inverse of 0, which becomes something like 1 over 0, which is undefined. So the secant of pi halves does not exist. In your calculator, let me show you this. I can go cosine of 90. I want the reciprocal of that, so I'm just going to hit this button right here, x to the negative 1. That's your reciprocal button on your 8384. Once I do that, check out what my calculator told me. Told me that I'm trying to divide by 0, so I'm getting an error. So that's my other reason I know it's undefined. Here goes my cotangent of pi thirds. In terms of a triangle, it means I got a 60-degree angle right there. Means this side must be radical 3, this must be 2, and this must be 1. Well, think about this. The tangent is the opposite over the adjacent. So that means the cotangent must be the adjacent over the opposite. So this becomes 1 over square root of 3. Get rid of the radical in the denominator by multiplying by radical 3 over radical 3. So here's the secant value of cotangent of pi thirds. Radical 3 over 3. This also is one of those decimals that I want you to start knowing a little bit. 0.577. Check this out. If I would have went tangent of 60, go get me the reciprocal. If you can start recognizing that decimal, we just got a shortcut to finding some answers. Cotangent of 135. Well, two ways to do this one. I could draw a 135-degree angle, meaning I got a 45-degree angle there, which means I got 1, negative 1, radical 2. Well, the tangent of this thing, let me find the tangent of 135 and then do the reciprocal. Well, that's going to be negative 1. Well, what's the reciprocal of negative 1? The answer is negative 1. Once again, tangent of 135 reciprocated. My calculator gives me that answer. Your calculator can do a lot for you, but it can't do everything for you. Cosecant of 210. I'm going to get rid of this triangle real fast just so I have some room to draw. If we think about the triangle I got, I'm going to have a triangle right there with a 30-degree angle. That means here's my 1 as I run out of room. There's a 1 over there, a radical 3, and a 2. Cosecant is the reciprocal of the sine. Well, if you go get the sine value of this, it looks like I'm going to have negative 1/2. Go get the reciprocal of that then. So it looks like my cosecant value is negative 2. Another one the calculator could have helped you out on. Sine of 210 reciprocated, negative 2. Now this one you're saying, good. I like all this stuff, so I'm going to go cosine of 225, the reciprocal of that, and get, well, if you recognize that number, that's good. Just write the answer down. If you don't recognize that number, let's kind of fight through this a little bit. I'm going to think of this as cosine of 225 degrees. Whatever that answer is, the reciprocal. Let me see if you recognize cosine of 225. Do you recognize negative 0.707? If you do, that answer is negative radical 2 over 2. But I need the reciprocal of that. Well, the reciprocal is going to be negative 2 over square root of 2. Multiply the numerator and denominator by the square root of 2. So I got negative 2 radical 2 over 2. Here's my answer. Negative radical 2. Okay. If I was drawing a triangle on this one, guys, it's really a little faster than what we just did. 225 degrees is going to be right there. That's going to be a 45-degree angle. So it looks like I got 1 square root of 2. These are going to be negative. Well, the cosine is the adjacent over the hypotenuse. So the secant must be the hypotenuse over the adjacent. Well, look how simple this would have been. Negative square root of 2. But that's where we are so far. I'm hoping that you start recognizing some decimals. Some main decimals that you need to start recognizing. If you see 0.866, that's going to be radical 3 over 2. If you see 0.707, that's going to be radical 2 over 2. A number that doesn't show up very often, but it will every now and then, 0.577 is radical 3 over 3. The other numbers that can show up, every now and then a square root of 3 will show up. And every now and then the square root of 2 will show up. If you can kind of recognize those decimals, this chapter won't be too bad for you. And then if you will, scroll on over to my number 4. Once I get there, I hope. And then I need to review with you a little bit of that pink note card, or that orange note card stuff. Okay, on to number 4 here. I said whatever note card. The orange note card is what I'm thinking. These all come off that orange note card. I'm going to show you a couple of different ways to think of it. But here's where we're going to start. I'm going to tell you that cosine of x is equal to 0.6. Whenever you have a decimal, turn it into a fraction when we're working with trig. So I know that the cosine of x is really 3/5. Now let's try to think through these. It says the secant of x. We'd like to figure out the secant of x. Well, here's the thinking. The secant of x is the reciprocal of the cosine. So that means I've got the reciprocal of 3/5. So the secant value is going to be 5/3. Here goes my b. I would like to figure out the secant of pi minus x. Here goes my thinking. I'm going to think of this as the cosine of pi minus x. From your orange note card day, I'm hoping that you recognize this as the supplements theorem. So if you look on your note card, you're going to see the cosine of pi minus x is the opposite of the cosine of x. Well, that's going to be the same thing here. That means this is going to be the opposite of the secant of x. And from part A, we said the secant is 5/3. So my part B is negative 5/3. So think in terms of something that you know and apply it. Here goes my part C. I'd like to figure out the secant of negative x. Well, I'm going to think of this as the cosine of negative x. And if you look on your note card or search your memory banks, remember cosine of x and cosine of negative x are the same answer. So cosine of negative x yields me the same answer as cosine of x. So that means secant of negative x yields me the same answer as the secant of x, which is 5/3. So just like what we did before, using different trig operations. Now the cosecant's a little bit different here. I'm going to think of that as the reciprocal of sine of x, but I don't have the sine of x. So here's what we're going to do to get it. I'm going to come over here and take what we know. My fact is cosine of x is 3/5. So I know cosine is positive in the first quadrant. So I've got a 3 right there, I've got a 5 right there, and I got a 4 right there. But now I got to ask you this question. Where else is the cosine positive at? And hopefully you're thinking it's also positive right there. So there's a 3 again, here's a 5, but here's a negative 4. Well, sine is going to be positive or negative 4/5. But that's not my answer. I need the reciprocal of that. Well, the reciprocal is going to be positive or negative 5/4. The reason we get two values, guys, we weren't restricted. Like if we come up here and said we're in quadrant number 4, then we know if it should be positive or negative. But we don't yet. And now I'm almost done here. Let's look at E then. I'd like to figure out the cotangent of x. There's two ways to do this. You could think of this as the sine of x over the cosine of x. Take your sine over your cosine. So I would have positive or negative 5/4 divided by, so I'm going to go times the reciprocal of that. 3/5 is going to be 5/3. And I wrote something wrong there. Come here, eraser. So I'm going to take the sine value, which is the positive negative 4/5, times the reciprocal 5/3. Well, the tangent value then would be 4/3. The cotangent is going to be positive or negative 3/4. That's tricky because there's a lot there. You have to remember to invert and multiply. Let me show you the little bit easier way. I'm going to come over to the triangle that I've already drawn, and I'm going to get the tangent value or the cotangent value. So come back over to the triangles here. Remember, our tangent is the opposite over the adjacent. So that means the cotangent must be the adjacent over the opposite. So looks like I'm going to have the adjacent as a 3. My opposite is a 4 and a negative 4. So here's my cotangent values. Positive or negative 3/4. And then last but not least, the opposite of the cosecant of x. Well, I'm going to think of this as the opposite of the sine of x reciprocated. Well, we found the sine of x right here. Positive and negative 5/4. Well, let me reciprocate this then. Well, wait. We found that is going to be my answer with the opposite of it. So I'm going to have the opposite of positive negative 5/4. So my answer, once again, positive or negative 5/4. Boom. So guys, there's section 5.9 with a little mess up right there. You can tell it's starting to get to be around midnight. So good there. So if you have any questions on that, we'll clean them up in class next time, and then we'll move on. Have a great night.